I made a quick video on an MA Performance EF3 or it's an EF2.5 for an EVOX or Evo 10. So basically, if you don't know the history of MAP, they used to make turbochargers. I ended up buying their CNC machine so I can still make these turbos. And there was an EF1, EF2, EF2.5, EF3, and an EF4, and I have all the CNC programs for those. The EF2.5 is the one that I'm showing you in this video, and the difference is the EF2.5 has the same compressor wheel as the EF3, which is 55.5 by 76 millimeter, and the turbine on the EF2.5 was a TD06 SL2 11 blade, which is 54 by 61. The EF3 had the same compressor wheel as the EF2.5, but it had a TD06H turbine, which made it pretty much almost like an FP Red. It was pretty equivalent to that. The TD06H turbine is 67.2 by 58.8 millimeter. The MA Performance turbos were actually pretty good quality. The only thing that was bad quality about them was the thrust bearing. However, that was something easily changed and fixed, but I guess at the time MAP didn't realize what was going on with them, and they made a bunch of them, and they probably didn't R&D them. So because of that, a lot of them came back under warranty, and eventually MAP decided that they weren't going to do it anymore, just because, most likely, I'm guessing, because there were just too many failures. However, it's very unusual that a company just drops something when it's working so well as far as sales goes. Maybe some of the other problems was it's so hard to get some parts for the turbo business in general, and it's even harder to get them in a reasonable time frame. So maybe that's another reason why they quit doing them. I don't really know, but there was a lot of problems with some failures with the steel bearings, the thrust bearing, so we just changed those out to a quality bearing and it's good to go. Another thing that MAP had was the anti-surge for their compressor housings, which is pretty cool, but I don't have their end mill, so I can't do that. The part of the CNC program does have the anti-surge cut as far as the flaring of it, but I don't have the way to drill the holes and all that stuff for the anti-surge. And then, so another thing I want to talk about is we went with the EF2.5 versus the EF3, because if you go with the EF3 or the EF4, you have to change out the exhaust housing or you have to weld it up, because when you machine out the OEM turbine housing for the Evo 10, there's not enough material in that housing to be able to accept the TD06H turbine without being cut through, so it'll cut a hole in the housing. So, but if you go with the TD06 SL2 or the TD06 turbine, the TD06 turbine is 55 millimeter, then you still have enough room to put that turbine without cutting a hole inside the housing. So another reason why we avoided going with the TD06H turbine was because you are stuck with two options. You can weld up the original housing, or you can buy an aftermarket turbine housing, which we have some of them that will fit on there. They're just cast iron, but they can warp really bad and they can crack really bad to where they need replacement in probably 3 years. It really depends on how much use you put on it and how much heat you put on it. But yeah, I don't really like to use those that often because they can fail and they're extremely expensive to get, and it's just kind of a hassle to deal with. But I went with the EF2.5 for this customer, what I recommended him, because we don't have to weld up the housing and he can keep the original exhaust housing, even though they do crack sometimes, but it's not as bad. Like, they'll crack, but they won't like warp really bad usually. They can, but it takes a lot longer for the nickel OEM turbine housings to warp and crack than it does an aftermarket one that is just regular cast iron. I have all the parts to rebuild your MAP EF3 and EF4 turbos. Just keep in mind the Evo 10 and the Evo 9 are both different because they're different rotation. They take completely different rebuild kits because the thrust bearing is directional. So if you need those parts, you can always visit our eBay store, which you can find by going to turbolabofamerica.com, and then you go under shop for turbo parts here in the navigation to get to our eBay store. If you don't see what you're looking for, you can always send us an email and I'll answer you as soon as I can.